In 2024, your host, Mark Smith, celebrated 7 years of the Microsoft Business Applications podcast. Now, we step into a transformative 2025 with a fresh new name. Welcome to the Microsoft Innovation podcast. Our new name reflects a broader vision, exploring the intersection of people, business, technology, and AI. You'll also hear from me, Meg Smith, a bit more as we launch a new exciting series called The AI Show.
Welcome to the Power Platform Show. Thanks for joining me today. I hope today's guest inspires and educates you on the possibilities of the Microsoft Power Platform. Now, let's get on with the show. In this episode, we're going to focus on how a technology-centric technologist can evolve into a business-centric technologist and why that is so critical in the modern marketplace. Today's guest is from Sydney, New South Wales in Australia. He works at IBM as an associate partner. He helps finance, procurement, and supply chain leaders improve organizational performance and delight customers and employees by modernizing how their teams work with Microsoft technologies. You can find links to his bio and social media in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Hi, Mark. Nice to be here.
Do you prefer Doug or Douglas?
Well, I think most people call me Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you prefer Douglas?
I actually don't mind either, to be honest. Okay. but most people call me Doug, as you know.
Yes. Before we get started, and by the way, I know Doug quite well. I've had the odd drink and meal with him over the last 3 years in the time that I worked at IBM. Are you still at IBM?
By the time, when's this going to actually air?
Months.
In months? Yeah, by the time this airs, no. I'm off to PwC.
Off to PwC. PricewaterhouseCoopers.
I am. So I'll be there in about 3 weeks' time. Very much looking forward to that change.
Awesome. Okay. Food, family, and fun. What do they mean to you?
Oh, my whole family revolves around food. I come from a family that absolutely loves to eat and travel the world eating. And so I've got an 18-year-old stepson and a 5-year-old daughter. And we spend the majority of our leisure time around Sydney finding new spots to eat. I think my 5-year-old is the most excited little kid to walk out the door on a Friday night and find somewhere for Korean food in the city, for example. And our eldest is half contemplating a career in food. I think that's how...
Interesting.
Yeah, that's how passionate he is about it. But we're off to Japan for Christmas this year.
Wow.
And that's going to be a 3-week eating trip yet again. But yeah, that's food and family. Family's obviously a lot of fun. But, I had this sort of moment maybe about 18 months ago where I thought, okay, my daughter's getting to the point where she sleeps pretty well now. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit more sanity in the household. And it's time to get back to doing something just for me, taking that kind of moment out. And so I picked up, like I generally do, niche little hobbies, pre-industrial furniture making. So hand tool woodworking, essentially.
Nice.
So that's what I make some time for every week and travel for various courses these days. I'm off to do a chair making course in Victoria between IBM and the new gig. Nice. Very much looking forward to that. Yeah.
So one thing that struck me about Japan in my time there was miso soup is never as good as what it is in Japan.
There's probably a lot of things that fit that bill, right?
Yeah, we're at Mount Fuji and we ate at a locals place there. And honestly, it will be a memory that sticks with me forever. Just the quality, the flavors, the richness, the abundance of food. And Japan, amazing.
Yeah.
So the woodworking side of things. So you're making things, like, is it just furniture or is it other things?
It's predominantly just furniture.
Nice. That's a big area, right? There's a lot you can do.
It's a big spectrum. And right now, I guess my core interest is in developing skills in two areas, both chairmaking, traditional Windsor chairmaking, so essentially mortise and tenon joinery, where everything joins into the seat. And the seat is the rigid structure. And to make it super strong, you essentially try and build it from parts that are just split directly from a log with an axe. So it's
Wow.
it gives you that real appreciation for the medium you're working with. And I think it's a huge amount of learning there. For me, it's actually the slow pace, but absolute quality that gets produced,
Nice.
as well as the reduction in how many tools you're actually using. You know, it's something that you could do without a single power tool. It's something that you could do without electricity, just by, you know, natural daylight. And when you start to think about what that means and what it meant during history, it starts to bring up concepts like the seasonality of work. Because, you know, in what we do, you can get stuck into a project pace where it's a grind for 2 years on a big program of work.
Yep.
And you never get that moment out to refresh. And there's no doubt that that's impacting the quality of what gets delivered. So I think I was drawn into it just because I've had a long interest in woodworking, and it was a hobby to pick up. And I think there's a re-emergence of interest in craft at the moment.
100%. There is.
But I've found it much more interesting in terms of just bringing up ideas about historically how we worked and how they might be really meaningful to building better habits and moving past the burnout culture that's evolved in, you know, the white collar factories of today.
I love this. This is awesome. How can a technology-centric technologist evolve into a business-centric technologist was something that we have discussed. And I really want to, I think it's so critically important, in that my observation over the last probably 7 years is that tech skills can be taught. And if you have a bias towards them, you can pick them up. You can turn your hand to any type of tech skill if you're that way inclined. Not everybody wants to do tech, but if you are. But what I am really seeing lacking is this business-centric view of tech skills. And I say that just coming off a call with a very large organization, maybe the largest in the world, and trying to reposition them, or a group of people within that organization, to not lead with tech, as in their product, and lead with what are the challenges of the organization, and let's map our tech to that, rather than just preach product, and really understand fundamentally the need, and then the product will come. You just don't need to lead with it and almost, I feel to some degree, ram it down someone's throat without understanding. And so these business skills that allow you to engage with senior positions in the organization, not just the IT department, but senior. It's funny because we're in software, right? People think, let's just go to the IT department. And the thing is, as a rule, IT doesn't control budgets, right? Strategic decisions for an organization are controlled at the executive layer. And I'll remind you of the last project I was involved with you on, which was a financial institution. And we got that deal because we engaged with the executive who gave us the role to then engage in the senior architects in their organization and further down, right? So for me, it's become a pattern of really importance of that business centricity. But what does it mean to you?
I think, Mark, we can come at that from two different angles. It means two things to me. One, it means being able to apply a diverse perspective to a question that you get asked. That's probably quite an abstract answer. But the second thing it means to me is how you go about building knowledge throughout your career, and what's the system and what's the model that you're trying to achieve. If we just start with an example, if you've got a technologist that's going in and looking to work with a team in a business, let's just pick up an example of that team. Maybe that team's procurement. If you're relying on people in the business to translate their understanding of good ideas into a set of requirements that you can build in the technology, then we're getting to the point with AI coding assistants and configurable tools where why wouldn't those business people just go and do that themselves? So if you can imagine individuals that can talk about good ideas, and those good ideas span both how technology can be employed and what good looks like for that team in the business. That for me is a business-centric technologist. And if I just break down my mental model for the way a business works and where you can change a business is just 4 layers. You've got strategy, and this is where typically the MBB firms like McKinsey are operating, right? And they're looking at what's the revenue model, what are the regulatory impacts, what's the market influences, what's the ambition, what's the opportunity, how does that translate into changing that business for better? Better being obviously quite a subjective term. Beyond the strategy layer, then you've got how does the business operate, right? And so that's the operating model. It's the processes and the roles in the business. Then you've got the capabilities. So a business needs a bunch of standard capabilities, like it needs an accounts payable team and an accounts receivable team and potentially a customer service team. And within that capabilities layer, then you've got the technology that enables that. And so some of that technology could be generic, like accounts receivable, accounts payable. Some of it's going to be technology capabilities that are quite specific to an industry. Like if you're talking the steel industry or anything that deals with a commodity, then you might have a dynamic pricing capability. It's a tech enabler for the way those businesses work. So you've got strategy, you've got operating model, you've got capability, and then the last layer, and this is the one that I think people often struggle to tie back in, is delivery. How does a business deliver its products and its services? And if you combine those things together, really, delivery is your traditional service design type and user experience layer. The capability layer is your traditional enterprise and solution architecture. Your operating model is that traditional functional transformation with operating model transformation. And then your strategy layers are all your strategy methods. And so a business-centric technologist has to develop an appreciation of all of those things in addition to just their core technology experience. And the way to go about doing that, or to think of that, is, I think, becoming a T-shaped consultant. You've got a breadth of knowledge and a depth of knowledge. And every year in your lifelong learning journey, you've got to work out which little bubbles do I want to put in to my breadth of knowledge that year? And is there anything in there that I've already developed some appreciation of that I actually want to go deep in and make part of the vertical part of my T, right? That for me is a business-centric technologist. And they should be able to carry a conversation or bridge the gap between people that have little appreciation of technology and people that have little appreciation of business.
Yeah, interesting. So how does one go about doing it? Like specifically the business side, right? Because we feel we're strong on the tech side, but the business side, how does one go about?
So I spent a good portion of my career at KPMG. I think that experience is part of the desire to go back to the Big Four for me as well. And it's about being able to be part of a diverse community of practice. I think so often our community of practice within the technology realm is quite constrained to people working within our technology domain. Like, for example, people that are Power Platform and CE practitioners or BizApps practitioners, alongside some other technology skills that support that, from data through to integration through to cloud. The first step is to actually have access to diversity in your community of practice. And that could be embedding yourself in a business or embedding yourself in an organization or a project that gives you that access. I think that's step one. But the more critical step is, how do you actually go about building that knowledge? And it's almost like creating your own knowledge base, right? That you can draw on when you're preparing for a workshop or going into a pitch. And I really love some work that a gentleman by the name of Tiago Forte did on this. And I think if you look at this model, it essentially breaks it down into both a pipeline for acquiring knowledge and a structure for managing knowledge. And that pipeline's quite simple. Code, capture, organize it into a structured repository, distill it down into something that's actually reusable, and then have a method of expressing it in content. And I think this is where, as technologists, we can probably push that idea a little further and essentially look at the concept of AI to pull from the knowledge base that we build over time. But then that knowledge base structure that he creates is quite simple. It's projects, right? So I'm working on a project, and that could be something at home, or that could be a project that I'm delivering as a professional. And this doesn't have to just apply to your professional life. It can be more broadly used. Then you've got the idea of areas. And this is just, where do you build a habit around knowledge acquisition? How, when you're listening to a podcast, do you actually capture a snippet and put it somewhere? How do you read a book on Kindle and take your highlights and put them somewhere? How do you grab things from the web as you're reading them and store them somewhere? And that's areas. This is this idea that you want to turn curating knowledge into a habit. Then you've got resources, and then finally you keep it clean, so you've got archives. So para, in essence. I think that's a really great structure to pick up.
Are you ready to accelerate your career in the Microsoft ecosystem? The 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, created by Mark Smith, is your opportunity to create a personalized pathway to success. Join over 1,200 alumni from more than 70 countries who have achieved remarkable results, from promotions to new job opportunities. Take it from Nathan, who said, "Since completing the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, I've become an MVP in business applications and doubled my income." Or from Parvez, who shares, "I've never felt as inspired or energized about my career as I do now." Sign up at arcor.nz365guide.com. You can find the link in the show notes. And if you use the code podcast, you'll get 10% off.
Did he, because the name rings a bell to me, did he write the book, The Second Brain?
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've read, I think, 2 or 3 of his books, and definitely a model. I've been working that power model into my life around knowledge acquisitions and putting it then in a format that's retrievable, right?
Yeah. And I take the areas section and I break it down into strategy, operating model, capabilities, and delivery. And then I take some standard models, like there's an organization called APQC. I guess they're a process standards organization. They produce a table of contents for process, a process taxonomy that's cross-industry. So I start with that. And then every time I'm gathering some knowledge, if it relates to order management and delivering goods, or it relates to dealing with escalations in customer service, I just put it all under the right kind of process. Yeah. That way, if I'm ever having to work with an organization and the scope of work covers those process areas, I've got a repository of, I don't want to use the term better practice or leading practice. I think that's not necessarily true. It's a repository of good ideas, and I've got to work out if they're relevant or not.
So my reason for reading his books, when I read them and using this power process, is that I could see where AI was going, because I've only read them in the last 18 months, and I have been collecting knowledge for probably 15 years. And what I mean by that, an archive of all my emails, every receipt, every medical checkup, every manual for any tech or tools I get, I digitize and put it in there. And I've just been collecting. And my 2 main tools, of course, has been the archive function on email. That's pretty obvious. It's easy to create a PST file and extract that off. And I've never gone back yet, but I'm hoping that one day that the AI will be able to go take a look at that and perhaps understand me better, or, what do I want to get out of it? But then the other one I've always used is Evernote. And I've got, I think, 10,000 artifacts now sitting in Evernote. And then, of course, the OneDrive storage, which is now where I'm running my new power system, is within OneDrive and feeding that in. So AI has been, I always felt that in the future tech would get to somewhere, and why I did this is that of all that history that I've been in tech, I would be able to derive greater value in the future when the tooling allowed me to extract that. In the area of AI now with consulting, How do you see that changes? And I'm not really looking for so much, yes, it's going to allow us to build new software, but how does it apply to a technologist in a day-to-day basis? Like, how can they use AI? And really, I'm asking how you're using AI in your day-to-day roles that is an enabler for you.
So I've got two key perspectives on this. One, I'm using AI so I can get time back for deep and creative thought. Because I think one of the biggest risks of AI is that we stop producing interesting, novel content. Some of the estimates are by 2030, such a large percentage of all the content that's publicly available will have been generated largely by AI that you can't even train AI on that information anymore.
Yeah.
So one, for me, it's about creating time to do really meaningful work, and meaningful in the sense of that it's well thought out, it's creative, it's innovative, it's pushing the bar forward somewhat. It's taking time for mastery. Two, I'm kind of using it the way you were just talking about it. It's how do I take a whole lot of knowledge and express that knowledge in a context? So I'll give you an example. One of the little pet projects I've had on the side at the moment is taking everything that's on Microsoft's documentation of biz apps. So particularly the documentation around configuration of FinOps, for example, being able to extract that, put it into a knowledge graph, and then relate it back to some of those things I was talking about in my paramodel around a process model and a set of capabilities, so that I can quickly go, hey, I'm going to run a workshop and it's going to talk about the source to pay process. I want to specifically focus on guided buying and all the design decisions and configuration decisions that the customer would need to make in relation to setting up the procurement and sourcing functionality in FinOps for a guided buying process and the entire buying channel, which is right through to payment in essence. And there's a few interesting things there. I think people are getting pretty familiar now with RAG, retrieval augmented generation. How do you get a document to be turned into something that AI can kind of work out, these bits of the document are relevant to the question that's been asked, and spit you back something. Where that becomes more interesting is when you start to take a bit more control. And so, one, if you model it in a graph to begin with, then you're defining the relationships between data in a more structured way, which can lead to a more usable output when you need precision in consulting. Two, if you start to combine it with tools like LangChain or semantic kernel from Microsoft, or frameworks I should call them, then you can actually start to build quite a structured pipeline of question and answer with models to get really well created outputs from them that are quite sophisticated, more than a simple prompt might give you with a document that's, attached to a GPT-4 model. And so I'm starting to use AI, and it's actually been a reason to develop deeper technical skills or muscle that I haven't used in the last 15 years. Because the interesting thing is when you go just a bit beyond what's almost turnkey and you start to apply that technology to the exact problem that you spoke about. There's all this stuff that we've gathered over time. How can we use that to competitive advantage to get rid of some of the time-consuming work that we might be doing today?
Yeah.
But, Mark, there's also another really interesting point there. I spoke about this idea of diverse community of practice. For me, the greatest thing AI can do for a lot of consultants right now is if you ask it some questions, it can give you a response that's formulated from diverse knowledge.
Yeah.
It's automatically starting to point you in the direction of maybe some of the things you might want to learn.
Yeah. One of my common prompts is show me where I've got gaps in my thinking. So I'll give it a bunch of stuff that I've created and say, show me where I've got gaps. And of course, it's filling that gap from that diverse knowledge. And it's interesting you talk about that chaining, because that's what I've got heavily into lately is multi-prompt that is all automated.
Yeah.
So it has output that is then fed back into input to another query and refined down. So we're talking about 5 or 6 prompts, but I've set up as an automation because I'm going to use the model over and over again. And it was interesting what you said there about the problem is, in the near future, there will be no new data to train on. I find that, like earlier today, I was putting together a presentation and I asked, AI for some advice around the content of a particular slide. And it took a direction that was just not where I wanted to go. I wanted to refocus it on a specific area. And I feel that although AI is creating content in that situation for me, it's highly curated because I go back and go, yeah, sorry, that's not what I meant. I'd much rather want to focus on these 3 key areas, and can you expand those? And so obviously it goes out and it goes, okay, these concepts are what I need to highlight on. And they become the 3 or 4 pillars of whatever my slide was going to be about. So although AI is creating that content, I think a lot of it is still going to be massively human assisted because its direction was not the direction I needed to communicate with this customer. It was a different that I knew just from the conversations and the engagements that I have had. So I wonder if that knowledge will still be highly valuable and that it's still going to be human curated, if you like.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm certainly not an expert on model training, but I think the key thing is that we just have new ideas still, and we're still putting enough effort into creating new ideas and expressing new ideas. Have you got a favorite AI-based tool at the moment?
Yeah, well, as in GPT has always been my favorite. Yeah. As in I haven't been, I've got Claude, as in right now, if I open my browser, I've got, on my first time opening a browser, I have 6 different AIs come up that I'm paying for. And so if you look from a text perspective, is really ChatGPT and Claude are the 2 that I go to. And then I have Perplexity as well that I pay for, which gives me a much more, if I'm wanting to make sure I can solidly reference, because I've found sometimes I'll ask for a quote from somebody and it will make up quotes and attribute them to somebody. And I'm like, where's that from? And then it will go. So I had one, it said it was Brad Smith, the chief legal counsel of Microsoft, said the quote. When I drilled into it, it said, no, it was Satya that said the quote. When I drilled into it further, it said, no, it was Bill Gates that said the quote.
Right.
And what I found, it was a fabrication of 3 snippets of 3 different things that they had said that it had put then into a quote and just, gave it one of them. So I'm much more, anytime I have that, I absolutely fact check, that it is. If I'm going to give statistical data, I fact check that I can tie it to a body of work that I can reference with a URL, for example. But then on the image, I have paid for Midjourney for ages. I have Stable Diffusion. I've installed full Stable Diffusion on my desktop. So we're talking about 10 gigs odd of that LLM running locally. And then the other one that I have, which I've just been running recently, and I'll see if I can do this without interrupting our session. My probably favorite image generator at the moment is a Lambda chart, as I have that. Ideogram. Napkin AI is the other ones that I have automatically open. So have you looked at Napkin AI?
I haven't looked at Napkin, no.
Wow, you want to check it out. You can create your body of work and you want a really good illustration for it. Mm-hmm. And it will generate not an image like a photo or anything like that. It'll generate a CSV diagram of your concept. And It's totally free at the moment, but the quality of it to illustrate your concept. So let's say I used the other day, I wanted to illustrate RBAC, right? Mm-hmm. Role-based access control. And the diagram it came up with I knew that when I explain this to other people, they're going to go, oh yeah, I get it. Like the diagram makes sense. And so I'm finding that for technical illustration, such a powerful tool.
Yeah, I have to have a look at that. One of my favorites at the moment is Notion and Notion AI.
Oh man, I'm just deciding whether I shut down Notion. It feels cluttered to me.
It feels cluttered. I think it's about, again, I've used Para as a structure for Notion. along with those layers of business design, and I've built it into a database model of capabilities and processes that I can attach everything to. But the thing that I love about it, and I think this could be really a revolutionary tool for people that want to become business-centric technologists, is you can ask it to describe a business process, and you can ask it to tell you what are the controls, like workflow approvals or reports in that process. But then you can say, hey, could you draw a flowchart of that process?
Is that right?
And it will generate, there's something called Mermaid, which essentially lets you, in almost a markdown style syntax, describe process flow diagrams and some other UML style diagrams as well. And so it'll draw a diagram of the process. And the time that takes in client delivery is a lot of time.
Massive. And so that's part of Notion. I'm going to crack that up after this and have a go with it, because one of the things I haven't touched, and I've got a full version of Notion, I haven't actually touched the AI functionality in it. Just haven't gone there.
So it's the only AI that I pay for is Notion AI.
No way.
Because I've been lucky through work to have access to. Certainly IBM has its own suite of tools for this, but Notion AI is the only AI I pay for, and I think it's quite a phenomenal tool for both building the knowledge base of a business-centric technologist, but also developing all of those consulting artifacts that you'd use to deliver a business-centric, technology-enabled program of work.
Incredible. Well, we're at time. It's been an interesting discussion. Thank you, Douglas, for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Stay safe out there and shoot for the stars.
Support for this episode comes from Justin Welsh's guide to finding your voice on LinkedIn. When I worked at Google, I never posted on LinkedIn because I didn't think anyone wanted to hear what I had to say. Then I took Justin's course, and it gave me the confidence to start sharing authentically. Check it out if you've been wanting to show up on LinkedIn but don't know how to start. Sign up using the link in the show notes.